Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a trip, a really, really long trip. We're going back millions of years to trace the story of how a primate ancestor evolved into the species that builds cities and explores the stars. This is the story of us.
So, where do you even start with a story this big? Well, how about with the most fundamental question of all? What is it that actually makes us human? It's not one single thing, but this incredible cascade of changes that set us on a completely different path.
And there's a word for this journey, of course. It's called hominisation. Basically, it's the epic multi-million-year process that took our ancient ancestors, the hominids, and slowly shaped them into us, separating our lineage from the other apes. It wasn't a single event, but a slow, grinding epic that forged our very species.
But before we dive in, we really have to wrap our heads around the timescale we're dealing with here. I mean, it's just immense. We're not talking about a few centuries or even millennia. We're talking millions of years.
Okay, just look at this timeline. It really puts everything into perspective, doesn't it? See that massive chunk of time at the beginning? Now look at the very, very end. That tiny sliver, that's all of recorded history. Every empire, every king, every war, every book you've ever heard of, it's all crammed into that little tiny slice. The vast majority of our story, the part that actually made us who we are, is completely silent.
So how did it all happen? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was kind of like a perfect storm of three huge evolutionary leaps that changed absolutely everything. First, we stood up on 2 feet. That's bipedalism, and it freed our hands. Second, our thumbs evolved, giving those free hands the power to grip and create. And third, our brains started to get bigger, providing the complex software to run all this amazing new hardware. All right, so let's start with that first step. Literally, let's go back to the very beginning of our family tree and meet the pioneers, the first of our ancestors to take those crucial, world-changing, upright steps.
And here they are, meet Australopithecus. These early hominids were walking around Africa between 2 and 5 million years ago. And they are, for all intents and purposes, the very first chapter in the story of humanity.
Now, these guys were a total game changer. And it all comes down to one thing. They walked upright. By getting up on 2 feet, they unlocked the potential of their hands. They weren't making tools yet, not by a long shot, and their brains were still pretty small. But that one simple change, it set the stage for literally everything that followed. Okay, so you've got these freed up hands. What's next? Well, that potential was just sitting there, waiting for someone to unlock it, and the next species in our family tree did just that. They kicked off the world's very first tech revolution. So, about 2.5 million years ago, a new player enters the scene, Homo habilis. And his nickname, Handyman, tells you everything you need to know. Why? Because this was the hominid that looked at one rock, then another, and had the brilliant idea to smash them together to make a sharp edge. This wasn't just using a tool, this was manufacturing.
And you can see the jump right here. The brain is bigger, and there's this massive shift in what they're doing. They're not just picking up a rock to use it. They are intentionally shaping stone. They're thinking ahead. They're creating technology to solve problems, like getting more meat in their diet. Okay, so after Homo habilis, things really start to pick up speed. The next major character in our story, Homo erectus, takes that little spark of technology and basically turns it into a raging fire of innovation that would change, well, everything.
I mean, Homo erectus was a true pioneer, no question. They were making way more sophisticated tools, hunting together in groups, and get this, they were the very first of our ancestors to actually leave Africa. But their biggest, most game-changing trick, it wasn't something they made with their hands. It was something they tamed. You see, controlling fire was so much more than just having a campfire for warmth and scaring away predators. It was a biological revolution. When you cook food, it's way easier to digest. That meant our guts could actually get smaller, which freed up a ton of metabolic energy. And where did all that extra energy go? Straight to our power-hungry brains. You could say fire literally fueled the growth of our intelligence. And if you look at how the tools changed over time, what you're really seeing is the evolution of the mind. I mean, look at the difference. Step 1 is just smash rock, get sharp edge. But step 2? That's looking at a rock and seeing a perfectly symmetrical, multi-purpose tool inside it, and then knowing all the steps to bring it out. That's a huge cognitive leap. So, with survival getting a little bit easier, thanks to better tools and fire, the next big steps in our evolution weren't really about our bodies or our technology. They were internal. We're talking about a change in consciousness itself.
And that brings us to one of our closest relatives, Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals. And with them, we see something totally new, something profound. They buried their dead. Just stop and think about that for a second. Why would you bother doing that? It suggests mourning, memory, maybe even wondering what happens after death. This is our first real glimpse of a mind grappling with big, abstract ideas like mortality.
And then, finally, we show up around 120,000 years ago in Africa. Homo sapiens, that's us, arrive on the scene. And we walk into a world that already had other types of humans in it. But we brought something different. A new kind of mind, with a capacity for creativity and symbolic thought that was unlike anything seen before. Now, don't get me wrong, Neanderthals were incredibly smart and tough. They were perfectly adapted for where they lived. But Homo sapiens, we had a different kind of smarts. You could call us cognitive Swiss Army knives. We were super adaptable, able to invent on the fly, and our complex language allowed us to cooperate and plan in ways no one had ever seen before. We didn't just survive in new places, we completely transformed them. Yeah, with Homo sapiens, it's like all the lights of culture just suddenly switch on. It's not just about survival anymore. Suddenly, it's about painting these incredible stories on cave walls, carving sculptures that have deep symbolic meaning, developing language to share complex ideas. The world wasn't just a place to find food anymore. It became a canvas for our imagination. So, armed with millions of years of evolution in both body and mind, Homo sapiens was ready to take those last few giant steps that would lead directly to, well, to us, to the modern world. And then comes the biggest shakeup in how we lived: agriculture, farming. For the very first time, we didn't have to wander around looking for food. We could stay in one place. And those permanent settlements grew into villages, then towns. And once you have a stable food supply, not everyone has to be a farmer. People can specialize. And that's what leads to the discovery of metallurgy, working with metals. First copper, then bronze, then iron. And this just changes everything again. New tools, new wealth, new power structures, and yeah, new and more organized ways to fight. The world as we know it really begins right here. So I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier because it's so important. Just remember this one number: 99%. Over 99% of the entire human story happened before anyone wrote anything down. All the stuff we think of as history, the empires, the kings, the internet, it's all just the very tip of the iceberg, built on this massive ancient foundation. So when you look at the whole story, from a creature just learning to stand up to a species that can literally change the face of its own planet, one thing becomes crystal clear. Change and adaptation are what define us. It's in our DNA. And that leaves us with one last really interesting question to think about. After all this time, after this incredible journey, do you think it's over? Or are we maybe just getting started on the next chapter?